Not a cloudy day, not fog, just darkness for 18 months. No harvests, no warmth, no explanation. Welcome to 536 AD. Historians call it the worst year in recorded human history. And once you hear why, you might agree. To understand 536, you need to know what the world looked like just before it. The Byzantine Empire was thriving. Constantinople was one of the most powerful cities on Earth. Trade routes stretched across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Populations were growing. Things were not perfect, but they were moving forward. Then something happened in early 536 that nobody could explain. A mysterious fog rolled across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. It wasn't a local weather event. This fog covered thousands of miles. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave light without brightness, like the moon. For a full 18 months, daytime temperatures in Europe dropped by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius. That might sound small, but 2.5 degrees was enough to destroy almost every crop across the continent. Summer temperatures in 536 were the coldest in the past 2,300 years according to ice core data. Ice cores. That's how we know this really happened. Layers of ice drilled from glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica. Each layer traps tiny particles from the air, including volcanic ash, and that's the leading theory. A catastrophic volcanic eruption in early 536 blasted material into the upper atmosphere. The ash and sulfur particles acted like a giant sunshade, reflecting the sun's energy back into space. Scientists now believe the eruption came from Iceland. And it was not a small one. But here's the thing that makes 536 particularly brutal. The eruption in 536 was just the beginning. In 539 to 540 AD, two more massive volcanic eruptions followed. Back to back. The planet had barely started recovering when it got hit again. And again. Collectively, historians and scientists call this period the Late Antique Little Ice Age. It lasted roughly from 536 to around 660 AD. Over a century of cold, instability, and suffering. But let's go back to 536 specifically, because the famine alone is staggering. With temperatures dropping and sunlight blocked, growing seasons across Europe were cut in half or wiped out entirely. In parts of China, historical records describe snow falling in the middle of summer. In China, in summer. In Peru, ice formed on roads that had never seen ice before. In Ireland, tree ring records show almost no growth at all between 536 and 545 AD. Trees are one of the most reliable biological clocks we have. When they stop growing, things are very bad. Across the Mediterranean, grain prices skyrocketed. People who had food sold it for 20 times the normal price. Those who had nothing starved. And starvation does not come alone. When people are weak, malnourished, crowded together, disease moves in. And 536's timeline leads directly into one of the worst pandemics in human history, the Plague of Justinian. First recorded in 541 AD, just a few years after the volcanic winter began, this was bubonic plague, the same category of disease that would later become the Black Death. It swept through Constantinople, Egypt, the Middle East, and across Europe. At its peak, 5,000 people were dying per day in Constantinople alone. 5,000 per day in a single city. The Emperor Justinian himself caught the plague. He survived, but the empire never fully recovered. The Plague of Justinian is estimated to have killed between 25 and 50 million people over the following century. Some estimates say it wiped out nearly half the Eastern Roman Empire's population. But wait, was the volcanic winter actually the cause of all this? Or just a coincidence? This is where scientists get careful. Correlation is not causation, but the timing is extremely hard to dismiss. A cold climate disrupts agriculture. Agriculture failure causes malnutrition. Malnutrition weakens immune systems. Weakened immune systems and mass movement of starving refugees create ideal conditions for plague. It wasn't just one disaster. It was a cascade, each crisis opening the door for the next. So what else was happening in the world during this specific year, 536? In Scandinavia, the darkness and cold were so severe that people began abandoning farms en masse. Archaeological evidence shows that roughly 75% of farms in southern Sweden were abandoned during this period. 75%. That's not migration. That's civilizational collapse at the local level. Norse mythology actually has a word for this kind of total winter darkness, Fimbulwinter. Some historians believe Fimbulwinter, the mythological winter before the end of the world, was inspired by real events in 536. When the real world starts matching your apocalypse mythology, you know things have gotten bad. Meanwhile, in the Arabian Peninsula, something else was shifting. The climate disruption caused drought and agricultural failure across the Middle East. This contributed to the collapse of existing trade routes and power structures in the region. Some scholars connect these instabilities to the conditions that would eventually reshape the entire political and religious landscape of the Middle East. The ripple effects of 536 were not just immediate. They helped shape the next 200 years of history. Let's talk about something that often gets overlooked: the psychological impact. Imagine being alive in 537 AD. The sun has been dim for over a year. No one knows why. There is no science to explain it, no internet to check, no government emergency services. You just wake up every day not knowing if the sun will ever come back. Many religious movements and cults flourished during this period, offering explanations for the seemingly divine punishment. People did what people always do when they don't understand something terrifying. They looked for meaning. Some rulers were blamed, some were overthrown. The darkness became a political weapon. In China, the Wei dynasty was already fracturing. The famines of 536 accelerated rebellions that had been simmering. When you can no longer feed your army or your people, control becomes extremely difficult to hold. Back in Europe, the Sasanian Persian Empire was also being rocked by climate-driven instability. The empires that had seemed permanent and unshakable were all bending under the weight of the same invisible enemy: a volcano, cold, hunger, plague. The four horsemen, but make them geological. Could something like 536 happen again? The answer, according to volcanologists, is yes. Large eruptions that inject material into the stratosphere are not ancient history. In 1816, the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia caused the year without a summer. Crops failed across Europe and North America. Famine followed. It was a taste of 536 on a smaller scale. The difference between Tambora in 1816 and whatever hit in 536 is magnitude. 536 was significantly worse, and modern civilization, as advanced as it is, still depends on agriculture, supply chains, and stable climate patterns. A supervolcano eruption today would strand flights, disrupt food supplies, and within months cause widespread shortages. We are more connected than the Byzantines were. That's both an advantage and a vulnerability. But let's bring it back to 536, because there's one more thing that makes this year uniquely interesting. For centuries, historians dismissed accounts of the mystery fog and the sun going dark as exaggeration or myth. After all, the sources were old, written in Latin and Greek by people who didn't understand science. Then the ice cores came along, and suddenly the ancient writers didn't seem so confused after all. In 2018, a Harvard researcher named Michael McCormick led a team analyzing ice cores from a Swiss glacier. They found a massive spike of volcanic glass and sulfur particles right at 536 AD, exactly where the historical records said darkness began. The fog, the cold sun, the endless winter, it was all real, it was all verified. McCormick called 536 the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive in the past 2,300 years. Not 1347, the Black Death, not 1918, the Spanish flu, not even the World Wars. 536. A number most people have never even heard. And that's part of what makes it so haunting. It was catastrophic enough to reshape human civilization, and most people have no idea it happened. They planted seeds that didn't grow. They prayed to skies that stayed gray. They buried people they loved. And then they got up the next morning and tried again. Because that's what humans do. History remembers the kings and the emperors, the battles and the laws, but the people who actually kept civilization from collapsing in 536 were farmers, monks, and mothers. People who did not have the luxury of giving up. The late antique Little Ice Age eventually ended. Slowly. unevenly. But it ended. By the 7th century, populations began recovering. New political structures rose from the ruins of the old ones. Some historians argue that the collapse of old power structures actually opened space for new ideas and new civilizations to emerge. Destruction and recovery. It's an old pattern. Uncomfortable, but real. So the next time someone complains that this year has been rough, you can just quietly say, "At least the sun came up this morning."